This story happened to me about 7 years ago. I grew up in a small rural town in Western Australia, and after high school, many kids, including myself, will make the move to the city of Perth to seek opportunities and study. I had just moved into a new house in Perth with a high school buddy, not too far from our uni campus. The house was pretty grotty, but being 19 and having newfound freedom, we didn't really care. The house was a double-story, and I had a room upstairs. Often university classes would only go for a few hours each day, so I spent a lot of time at home studying and chilling out. One day I was having a sleep in the afternoon on my bed, when I heard a huge crash downstairs. I immediately presumed one of my roommates had dropped a plate on the tiles, and I remember thinking it was a little odd at the time, as normally, if it was a weekday, I was home alone. A few seconds later, I started to hear running all through the house, and doors slamming. Still being in a semi-daze after just being woken, I sat up on the end of my bed. I looked over towards my door, and suddenly the house was completely silent. I listened out to hear something, when suddenly I saw the door handle slowly turning, and a man burst into my room. Immediately my first thought was this was one of my roommate's friends who had picked the wrong room to enter. Stupid, I know, but again I was half in a daze. We looked at each other for what felt like ages, when slowly he pulled a large machete from behind his back. I immediately freaked out and just screamed at the top of my lungs. This seemed to alarm the man, who dropped the machete and bolted out, closing the door behind him. I locked the door straight away and called my best friend who lived close by, and he came round with another friend of mine, and armed with golf clubs, we searched the house, but find the man was gone. It turned out the smashing sound I heard was him throwing a brick through the sliding glass door to get into the house. We then called the police, who were angry with me for calling my mate and bringing him over rather than calling them straight away. Overall, by the end, I didn't even have time to be scared. Everything happened so fast. And being a bit older now, I look back and still get the chills about what could have happened to me. Now this happened to me around 2 weeks ago, and I can't get it out of my head. Let me start with a little backstory. I'm a female, about 166 centimeters tall and less than 50 kilos, and I was at the time at home on distance learning. I live with my parents in our family home, and usually my mum is home with me. She is a stay-at-home mum, and Dad works on the other side of our hometown. We are currently renovating our bath and toilet, so my dad employed some workers, like a plumber, a bricklayer, and anything else you can think of. He never uses big companies and likes to support the smaller businesses. This is very important for later. On this particular day I was home alone, having some online class and playing video games, along with taking notes from class. It was around 10 a.m. I think, when suddenly I saw a man outside our fence, just looking around, and stood next to a red car. The car was parked in a way that was obvious to people that whoever it belonged to was visiting our house. He found our doorbell and rang it, so I, in my pyjamas, automatically go to open the door. I felt safe enough, because Dad told me a few days prior that he was expecting a plumber, so I thought that this was him. I opened the door and said hello, and he politely answered, telling me he is the plumber my dad had employed. To confirm this, he told me Dad's last name, which is very, very rare in my country, and because of renovations of our bath and toilet, this information was pretty much secret, as we hadn't told anyone other than my family that we were having the work done. I had no reason to think this man was anything other than what he'd said. He was normal enough, just some worker asking to come look at the pipes. He told me that he was here now because his doctor's appointment was switched, so he was free today. I unlocked the gate and let him into the house, guiding him to our bathroom. He looked at it, asked me some plumber-orientated questions like, "Where does this one come from?" and "What is that?" and I tried my best to answer. Then I let him into our cellar, where some of the pipes are accessible. He was just looking at the pipes and talking about them, still mentioning information known only from me, my parents and my partner. He made some small talk, but nothing really unusual. He actually asked if I had online schooling, because he'd heard my teacher's voice from my room. He didn't ask any obviously weird questions like, "Are you home alone?" or anything like that, so no alarms were going off in my head. He then told me he will call my dad and talk about the new date for him to come back and work on the pipes. The first thing I noticed to be a bit strange was that he hadn't got my dad's mobile number in his phone. I gave it to him, trying not to overthink it. Then he said goodbye and I went back inside. He walked to his car and left. I decided to call Mum to tell her that the plumber had been, when Mum went silent and asked me about what he looked like and what his car looked like. I answered saying that he was in his 40s, he had a big red car, was wearing normal work clothes and had brown hair. Suddenly she said, "Lock yourself in the house after locking both gates and front doors. That was not our plumber. Don't go outside." I was pretty confused and told her that he knew personal details, even Dad's surname. She told me that she didn't know who that guy was, because our plumber was an older man with a big van and was right now in hospital getting treatment for his cancer. He'd phoned up the day before about it. I casually glanced through the window, only to see that the guy was in his car and still parked outside our house, just sitting there. I told Mum I'd locked both the front door and the gate after him, so she didn't worry. But I lied, as I didn't want to upset her. So I, a defenseless girl in pajamas, sitting in an unlocked house, with a guy twice my age, weight and height, outside, who I didn't know, and he knew that I was home alone. After some time my mum had rushed home to find me safe and sound, but just a little bit confused. My dad then came home and I told him about this plumber, and he confirmed that it wasn't our plumber. We quickly ruled out the possibility of him being a co-worker of the original guy, and maybe it was just some weird mixing up of names. As I said, our surname, especially my dad's, is very, very rare, and he is the only one with this particular surname, at least in this region. The possibility of my partner telling someone is 0%, as he's really introverted, so even some weird twisted prank on his side is impossible. I don't know who I let into my house, but I know he was not the plumber, and it gives me chills to this day, because he could have easily harmed me, or even taken me away without any help for hours, or witnesses. So I was just lucky he didn't do anything. So for starters, I've been dating this girl for a while now. Her name is Isabel, and we've been dating going on a year very soon, and all is going well in that regard. However, when we first met, she told me about a less than ideal ex-boyfriend she'd had a couple of years before she'd met me. They still went to the same school, and he ended up going to the same university as us after we graduated high school. Apart from that, all three of us went to the same church, meaning there was a lot of opportunity for him to meet us. The creepy encounters with him, Jose, started a little before we graduated high school. After he'd heard we were dating, he was furious, even going as far as to try and say I was sexually abusive on Twitter, but nobody believed him, given his accusation was complete rubbish, and he was notorious for doing the same in the past in order to keep Isabel from talking to other guys when they were together. That was just the beginning, though. It started off small at first, seeing him at the mall whenever we would go out on dates, and after a while it seemed like a little too much to seem like a coincidence. He started showing up to our church, which although wouldn't ever really be abnormal, he all of a sudden joined the same youth ministry as well. It seemed as if he was trying to get as close to us as possible at all times. There was one instance I remember very specifically, at a grad party everybody was invited to. Everyone was in the backyard, and I remember looking across the patio and just seeing him staring at me and Isabel from the other side. His eyes didn't move, and his breathing was very heavy, as if he was angry, anxious, or both. He didn't try anything that night, though, probably because of the other people there. But after I left the party and dropped off my girlfriend at her house for the night, I saw a black car following me for a majority of the way home, which I didn't really think much of. And not to sound like that guy or anything, but I wasn't too worried about it either. I'm fairly well built and have done martial arts for a little over 6 years. The next day, that same car was tailing me almost the whole day while I was running errands. Things got a little heated in the afternoon, though. I was sitting in my car outside of a store, waiting for a curbside pickup, when he parked a few spaces down from me, got out of his car, and came up to my window. He started yelling at me, saying I would never be good enough for Isabel, that she still loved him no matter what I thought, and that he was going to make sure that she and I weren't together. I just tried to ignore him. Starting anything would have probably been a bad move, given that he hadn't even touched me or my car, but I was still a little heated. After heading home, it was already pretty late, so I just played video games for a while, until I was tired enough to go to sleep. When I was walking back to my room, I saw him from my window, just standing there on the sidewalk, looking right at me. The only reason I knew it was him was because of the light from one of the street lamps. My parents had also seen him and asked me to go check it out, since they aren't the youngest of people and wouldn't be able to do much other than yell at him to go away. But as soon as I walked out, he just got in his car and left. This happened every night for about 3 days straight. The last night I ever saw him was not unlike the others, except this time he didn't leave when I went outside. In fact, he started walking closer to me. I didn't notice until he was a lot closer, but he had something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a fairly large knife you would use in the kitchen. Adrenaline kicked in and I ran back into the house and told my mum to call 911, after which I went back outside. He said, "Isabel belongs to me, and I'm going to make that happen no matter what." He ran at me with the knife, but muscle memory kicked in and I had him pinned down after that. The cops came shortly after and I explained the situation to them, after which he was arrested with a couple of different charges I really don't remember. One other thing I do remember, however, was what was inside his car. When the police came, they also searched his car to see if he had anything else I should have been worried about. They found a bunch of tape, some rope, another large knife, a handgun, and a camera. Now, I don't know what was going on through his head, but I could at least guess from that kit he had in his back seat that he'd planned on hurting me in some way, and recording it. I hate to think what would have happened if he had tried to come into the house while everyone was asleep, but I'm glad he was arrested for what he did, or planned to do anyway. To give some context, I was 14 when this happened, and I was with my best friend Holly, who was 17. We were both very small ladies, and obviously at the time very young. It was Friday night, and Holly and I went to her friend's place for a little get-together. Despite both being underage, we drank way too much, and by the time we decided to go home at midnight, we weren't very steady on our feet. We lived in a small city in Canada, and for the most part it was pretty safe. I was spending the night at Holly's place, and as we were drunk, we took the short bus ride home. The closest bus stop was about 1 kilometre from her place, and this particular stop is a park and ride, so there was a well-lit parking lot, and the rest of the walk was on a quiet residential road, with no street lighting. We'd walked this route many times and didn't think twice about walking it on this particular night. We got off the bus, both still drunk and enjoying our walk back to hers. We walked through the parking lot, which had a few cars parked, and started into the darkness. Everything was pretty ordinary thus far, but I noticed Holly got quiet and started to walk faster. I figured she was sobering up and keen to get home, so I started walking faster to keep up. She looked at me, seeing I was oblivious to my surroundings, and told me she thought someone was following us. I looked back to see a person walking behind us, but a decent distance away. No one else had got off the bus with us, and no one was around when we got off the bus, so we reckoned this person came from the parking lot. We both started to sober up really quickly, but tried to rationalize the situation against our gut instincts. We looked behind us every few seconds to gauge the situation and could see the person was gaining on us. We could now make out that the person was a full-grown male, and we were both starting to panic and run. Scenarios through our head when Holly told me we needed to run because he had a bat. We both started running, and as I did, I looked behind me to see this dude, and he was holding a baseball bat. I can't remember if he was running too or just speed walking, but he was still following us. I remember feeling this horrible urgency and panic overcome me, and survival instincts kicked in. Holly and I both knew we could not stop running until we were inside with the door locked. I know from running track that if you look behind you while running, you slow down. Against all my instincts, I didn't look behind me, and after what seemed like ages, we made it home. We ran into the house shaking and crying, and luckily Holly's dad was awake. We told him what happened, and he had us call the cops while he got in his car. He wanted to drive the road to see if he could find the dude and get a better description for the police, but he didn't see him. I'm not sure when we lost him, or if he followed us all the way home, but nothing came of the situation. It's been over 10 years since this went down, and I try not to think about what could have happened, but the thought of a grown dude waiting in his car with a baseball bat for vulnerable people to walk by gives me goosebumps. Many moons ago, when I was 15 or 16, I worked at Dairy Queen. The store was located on a street where taxis were always back and forth, so I never had to call a cab. I would just wait for one to drive by and hail it. My parents didn't drive, so we had a deal where they paid for half the cab ride. Whenever I worked the closing shift, midnight or later depending on how long it took us to clean up, my co-worker, who lived right next door to the store, would wait with me on the picnic tables until I was able to hail a cab. Late one night while sitting on the picnic table, I noticed a car drive by us. It seemed to slow down, but kept going. I don't know what made me notice it, but I did. Then a taxi came by and I hailed it. My co-worker, assuming I'm in the cab, goes home, and I tell the driver where I wanted to go. But he said he wasn't going that way, so I went back to the picnic tables by myself. I wasn't too concerned because, like I said, taxis would be up and down the street all the time. While I'm waiting, the car I had clocked earlier came round the corner and pulled into the parking lot. The driver got out of the car and started walking towards me. To this day, I do not know why I didn't just run to my friend's house. He said, "It's kind of cold out tonight, isn't it?" It wasn't, but I just agreed. Then he said, "It's kind of lonely too." Cue inner freaking. He went on to say, "God told me to stop and talk to you." At this point, I saw a taxi pull into the parking lot across the street. I didn't say anything, but just started walking towards that cab. Creep said, "I can give you a ride." I said, "No, that's okay." Then he said, "I love you." I sprinted for that cab, probably broke world records. I jumped in the back of the cab and asked the driver if he was working and could drive me home. He knew I was freaked out and got me home safely. I was so afraid the creep would follow. After that, I called a cab every single time I worked late and waited inside the store until it arrived. After I got my license and a car, when I worked late with other girls who had to wait for a ride, I'd wait with them inside the store or gave them a ride home myself. If they argued, I told them my story. This happened about a month ago, and I still can't shake it. I'm a receptionist for a professional office building in Pasadena, California. A female in my mid-20s who spends the long boring days at my desk listening to my favourite murder, crime junkies, and my new obsession, Let's Not Meet podcast that I started binging yesterday and got me writing this post. It was a normal Tuesday at the office. I got off around 6 p.m. and locked everything up, and I made my way down the stairs to the lit-up parking lot and say goodnight to the standing security guard. I pulled out my keys in preparation for the long walk to my car, which is located in the employee parking lot. You see, the employee parking lot is a block away from my office building on a secluded street with literally no street lights or through traffic. I'm not sure why this street had 0 lights, but it does. Normally it's not dark out by 6 p.m, but since it was November, it was pitch black. As a routine, I always pulled out my keys while I was walking through the lit-up parking lot, and I call my boyfriend just in case I get murdered or something. But the situation I found myself in on this occasion made me realize that my boyfriend couldn't help me through the phone. So I'm talking to my boyfriend, keys in hand, and I saw a tall, dark figure on the sidewalk that I was walking on to get to my car. I said something to my boyfriend, and I saw the dark figure walking towards me. I flipped on my phone light and shone it in his face when he said, "Who the hell you talking to, bitch?" I immediately got off the sidewalk and into the street to get away and reply with, "My boyfriend." I could tell right away that he was a dirty meth-head homeless man with a huge beard, khaki shorts, and a ball cap. He then started yelling at me, "Who you talking to, bitch?" Louder this time, and followed me along the street. I literally stopped and show him my phone like an idiot, trying to prove that I wasn't talking to him. He then came up to me at an arm's distance and started calling me awful names and demanding I go to the other side of the street, as if he owned the place. We are now both in the middle of the street, and I knew if I'd crossed to the other side, I would just have to cross again, as my car was on the side of the crazy homeless man. I told him, "Get the hell away from me or I'll call the cops right now." He then put his hand in the shape of a gun, put his fingers up to my head, and in a meth-induced slur says, "I'll kill you, bitch. Right here, I'll kill you." My heart sank at that moment. I realized this guy was out of his mind, angry and violent. I started to rush towards my car, all the while my boyfriend is on the phone saying, "What's going on? Get in your car, put your keys between your fingers and run." I then saw the man run towards my car, and luckily I dodged him, pressed the unlock button and got in quickly. He's now standing right in front of my car and proceeded to kick my front bumper, hard, repeatedly saying, "You better not call the cops." He then ran behind the dumpster, and it was like he was spying on me from there, as I was pulling out. He then started running around my car, towards the front, and I truly thought I'd have to run him over. He was now chasing my car down the road and then stopped at his belongings. I peeled into my office building and flagged down the security guard, hysterical. I told him there was a crazy man that just threatened to kill me. I called the cops and saw the man booking it down the street, which gave me the perfect view of his face and outfit. The cops sent officers out and I left the scene 5 minutes later. The crazy man was still on the corner, just standing there when I was leaving, so I screamed at him as I drove off. He tried to run after my car. Apparently the cops couldn't find him, and even sent a helicopter. I later found out that he'd tried to rob my co-worker earlier that night, but thankfully was unsuccessful. The next morning I saw the crazy man back in front of the employee parking, but 2 cop cars were surrounding him. He was arrested, but I was happy and anxious that I had to see this crazy man yet again. Following this, he proceeded to hang around that street for the next 2 weeks. I constantly saw him in the morning and on my lunch, and I was so paranoid that he was looking for me. I thought that's why he kept coming back. I messaged our office building manager, and they got a trespassing order on the dude. I hadn't seen him again until this Monday, where he was sleeping at the exact same spot where I first encountered him. My heart sinks every time I see him, and I relive my trauma all over again. Our office building now has employees move cars over from the employee parking lot to the main one around 4, so no one is walking in the dark anymore, and we use the buddy system now too. I have 2 pepper sprays that I don't go anywhere without, and I always thought that my obsession with true crime had prepared me for any scary situation thrown my way. But after this night, I realized that no amount of true crime podcasts could have ever prepared me to fight off someone who had a will to harm me. If this man had had a real gun, I'd have been done for. I've had a lot of scary things that have happened in my life, probably more than my fair share. When I was a child, I was nearly kidnapped 3 separate times. I only remember one of them, but my family has 2 other times that they say happened, which I will briefly go over. One of these times was at a barrel racing competition in Camp Verde, Arizona. A lady picked me up as an infant and tried to run away with me, but my dad chased her down and she let me go. Another time, someone else tried to break into our car when my mum left me inside for a moment to drop the mail at the post office. Apparently, even as a little kid, I had the presence of mind to honk the horn until she came out, and the guy left. Again, I don't remember these specific instances, and you know as much as I do now. The one time I do remember, though, I was a little bit older, and my brother and his best friend were there too. My mum owned a restaurant, and we would go to Costco to buy tons of wholesale food in one stop, and she would bring us along mostly because she didn't want to pay a babysitter, but also because we were cheap labor and would load and unload the car in exchange for chicken fingers or Costco pizza. This time my brother, his friend, and I opted to get paid up front and had Costco pizza, while my mum went around the store and got everything on her list. We ate our food, and before we went to look for our mum, went into the bathroom. There were 3 stalls, and my brother and his friend were on either side with me in between them. I think I was singing while I sat on the toilet, and didn't notice when someone else came in. I don't remember much about what he looked like, other than that he had a denim jacket, and I think he had a skinny, clean-shaven face. I know this much because he looked under the stall door, right at me. I was scared and stopped making noise, and my brother asked if I was okay, and the guy stopped looking at me and disappeared. Nothing happened for a minute, and then suddenly the man's arm reached under and grabbed my pants, which were around my ankles. He tried to drag me out under the door, but I screamed and put my hands under both sides of the stall, and my brother and his friend grabbed them and held on to me. I think my brother yelled at the guy, and we were all screaming, and they kept pulling me until the guy let go, and we heard him run out of the bathroom. We tried to run out and get a look at him, but he was gone. When we told my mum, she went to the Costco people to see if they had surveillance tapes, but they said the police needed to be involved and warrants and stuff needed to be gotten. We ended up just going home. It was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me, and I think it still affects me today. I sleep with my bedroom door locked and have nightmares about home intruders pretty often. This happened at Costco in Flagstaff, Arizona, probably somewhere between 1999 and 2001, and I've always wondered if something else like it has ever happened in that area, or if someone was ever caught for kidnapping around that time. I was hoping putting this on Reddit might stir something up, but if it doesn't though, that's okay. I just hope we never meet again. This happened to me about 8 years ago. I used to work at a tobacconist when I was 18. which was my first job after graduating high school, but it wasn't my first job in retail. Staff there were hired as casual employees, but on full-time hours, and I got the job at the time because I was young, and that meant I was cheap labour. The pay was pretty decent though, and I was job hunting, so I took the first job I was offered so I could finally move out of home. When I first started, there were 3 other employees. 2 of us would be on shift at a time with a 1-hour handover. The opening hours were from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m, and I was happy doing the closing shifts because I wasn't a morning person. A couple of months into it, the company decided to change their business hours during weekdays from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, with 9 p.m. on late night shopping. This upped my hours, and it also meant I was put on a couple of closing shifts a night with rotation between me and another employee, but only one person would stay at the shop from 6 p.m. I was a bit dubious about this, because I lived in a sketchy suburb in a sketchy town, so the later it got into the night, the more the undesirables were abundant. Our laws prohibit us from carrying protection, and at the time I didn't drive, so I relied on buses or taxis as transport. The latter weren't reliable here. You'd call one and they wouldn't show up, or they'd make you wait an hour or so. So I stuck with buses, because you knew they'd arrive, and Uber wasn't an option then. Now there was a transit bus stop 1 minute away from my work. One scheduled to leave at about 5 minutes before our closing time, so I tried to negotiate this with my boss, to close a little early, but he wasn't open to the idea. "You can catch a cab," he suggests. Yeah, I could, but that's not guaranteed. I usually got them on my 9 p.m. shifts, so my routine was to stay on until closing and wait 30 to 40 minutes for the next bus. I got into a routine of waiting in the closed store until 5 minutes before the bus was due to arrive, then walk and wait by the stop. So one night I shut shop, hung out a bit inside with the lights on, so the shopping centre security knew I was still there, and then I headed out to the bus stop at 8:30 p.m. I was relieved to see there were about 6 other people waiting at the stop, and as I was standing there waiting for the bus, a guy in his 30s or 40s, who is visibly intoxicated and on other stuff of who knows what, begins to approach me. "Where you headed?" he asked. "Home," I replied. He then asked, "Can I come with you?" I shook my head no, then he took a step closer to me. He is so close that I can smell and feel his breath on my face. I automatically step back so I'm not out of my comfort zone, and tried to walk closer to the other people. A regular customer I liked could see me and tried to start up a conversation to get me out of talking to this creep, but the creep got really annoyed with this. He became irate and confrontational, telling me to look at him when he's talking to me. He was smiling in a way that made me feel sick, and my whole body suddenly rushed with adrenaline. I tried to tell him that I wasn't talking to him, but he just kept trying to get closer to me and insisting we were going home together. Thankfully, the buses finally started to arrive and I felt relieved, hoping this guy would get on one before me. Nope. He lingered and asked what bus I was getting on. There was no way I was telling him, so I asked him instead what bus he was getting on. He told me that he was getting on mine. My heart sank. My bus was the last in, and everyone was piling onto theirs. I was about to be left alone with this guy, and I knew he would follow me. If I tried to call the cops on the bus, would he become aggressive? I was already in. How do I get out of this mode? Just as my bus pulled up and the doors opened, the transit security pulled up behind and rushed out of the car, yelling at the creep. "We told you to move on from here," they said. The creep started cussing and yelling, but then walked away. The security guys asked if I was all right. I just nodded and jumped on my bus before it pulled away. I'm so grateful they arrived when they did, and I dread to think what could have happened if this man had followed me home.